Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me express my gratitude to the LIBE and the AFCO committee for hosting this event. And let me welcome all of you and thank you for getting up early this morning. If I can ask a favor from the chair, would you give me a warning signal after 15 minutes so that I know I have to wrap up, okay, so that I don't talk too long and steal time from my other panelists. I will be talking about external citizenship and voting, and I will devote roughly 50% of the time to explain external citizenship status and its significance, and then external voting rights. I don't think it makes sense to discuss external voting rights without considering first the question, who are the citizens that may or may not have the right to vote from abroad? So let me start with a couple of definitions, conceptual in nature, what external citizenship is and why it arises in the first place. And the reason is very simple. All states in the world assign citizenship by birth through basically two different types of rules: jus sanguinis, acquisition by descent from citizen parents, or jus soli, acquisition by birth in the territory. And that status acquired by birth is not a temporary one. It's presumptively for life. It's meant to be permanent. And it can only be changed through naturalization, which involves applying for another citizenship that must be granted. So, because of that basic rule of citizenship that applies in all states, it can be carried abroad. It's not lost automatically by traveling abroad and taking up residence somewhere else, and it's not acquired automatically by taking up residence in another country. Therefore, immigrants retain their citizenship of origin until they decide to renounce it, and that's generally only possible after acquiring a new citizenship. Citizenship, external citizenship in a broad sense, we could define as the legal status, the rights, the duties, and the modes of political participation of nationals residing outside their state of nationality in relation to that state. So it is a status, rights, and activities that are transnational by nature because they are oriented towards a country where people don't reside. External voting is a specific form of external citizenship, both a right and a form of participation. And it includes, of course, non-resident citizens' right to vote, but also to run as candidates. And we still want to gather the information on what the rules in all the European member states are on these external voting rights. I would define external voting not just votes that are cast by ballot while you're residing abroad, but basically any vote that is cast by somebody who has a permanent residence abroad, even if that person might travel to the country where the election is held on election day and cast the vote there. And secondly, we have two basic ways how these votes are taken into account in electoral systems. The dominant mode, as I'm going to show, is the votes are just thrown in with all the other votes that are cast inside the country, but there are a couple of countries where external citizens elect special representatives. So in a way, external constituencies are created that are meant to represent the expatriates. What are the mechanisms generating or limiting the status of external citizenship itself? The most basic one I've already mentioned. This is birthright citizenship by descent. If you are born from citizen parents abroad, you generally will inherit the parents' original citizenship. In some countries, this is limited to the second generation, and even for the second generation, there are certain conditions attached. For example, a certain time of residence of the parent in the country of origin, etc. In other countries, it's plainly unlimited, and it can be passed on across generations into the third, the fourth, the fifth generation. There is no expiry date to citizenship in fact, many European states. So that is obviously a mechanism for the proliferation of external citizenship through emigration. The second basic mechanism is the toleration of dual citizenship. Until roughly the 1960s, there was a doctrine in international law that dual citizenship is an evil because it creates conflicts between states, it creates conflicting duties for citizens. It might also be an unjustified privilege those who hold the status. But that doctrine is fading away, as I will show very shortly. So we have now 4 different reasons why dual citizenship is becoming quite common in the present world. First is by descent from parents of mixed nationality. If father and mother have different nationality, the child will, in most cases, be a dual citizen by birth. Secondly, through the combined effect of jus soli and jus sanguinis. For example, when Germany introduced jus soli in the year 2000, it was aware that most kids would also inherit their parents' citizenship, and since Germany was so keen on limiting dual citizenship, they said then the children have to choose at the age of 23 for one or the other citizenship. Thirdly, through what we call incoming naturalization, so foreign nationals acquiring the citizenship of the country, more and more immigration states tolerate now dual citizenship in these cases. And fourthly, even more strongly, the sending countries of immigrants are keen on keeping the legal tie with their expatriates and therefore accept that if you acquire another citizenship abroad, your citizenship of origin will not be withdrawn. There is a special case of many countries of origin, specifically the Arab states, where it's not even possible to renounce your citizenship of origin, and in these cases the receiving country has to accept that that cannot be an obstacle to naturalization, and again dual citizenship will follow as a consequence. Finally and thirdly, we have the question of loss of citizenship after long-term residence abroad. There are not so many countries that have this kind of rule, and they apply it obviously only if the person doesn't become stateless thereby. So, secondly, there is a very interesting development inside the EU, where, for example, the Netherlands, until the 1990s, had a rule that after 10 years of residence abroad, if you have another citizenship, you lose Dutch nationality. Now, if that other citizenship is a third country citizenship, it would mean you also lose EU citizenship, and therefore by making use of your right of freedom of movement as an EU citizen, you lose your EU citizenship as a consequence. That is plainly a paradox, and therefore the Dutch parliament had to change that law, so you see an EU dynamic in this that requires states to adapt their nationality laws. This is a little diagram that just shows you the development with regard to that last provision that I've mentioned, the loss of citizenship when you acquire another one. And what you see here is until 95, there was still an up and down movement with some countries newly introducing that withdrawal of citizenship, and they include the Czech Republic, Estonia, and Moldova in our sample. But all the other arrows point upwards, which means countries are moving from the red zone, where withdrawal is the norm, into the blue zone, where dual citizenship would be tolerated. Here is another map of Europe that pictures the diversity of stances on dual citizenship. Although there's a general trend towards toleration, we do some countries that are strongly resistant with regard to accepting dual citizenship in incoming naturalizations. And the most strongly resistant countries now are Norway, Denmark, the 3 Baltic states, the Czech Republic, and Austria. Interestingly enough, the Czech government and the new Danish government have already proposed bills that will change their color on this map. So the Danish government has proposed more or less a broad toleration of dual citizenship, and the Czech government wants to propose at least dual citizenship in case of exit of Czech citizens requiring another citizenship, and it's still debating whether they want to accept it also in incoming naturalizations. So that map will have to be updated pretty soon, and it confirms the general trend. Here's another map where we try to aggregate several indicators for the strength of external citizenship. And this adds various indicators that I've mentioned before, such as the loss because of long-term residence abroad, the loss with the acquisition of a foreign citizenship, and whether jus sanguinis is unconditional across generations or conditional. So these are 3 possible obstacles to the proliferation of external citizenship, and what you see is the dark blue countries are those that have none of these obstacles. So these are the countries that produce most external citizens through their nationality legislations, whereas Denmark is currently the country that has all 3 obstacles quite strongly present, and therefore has a very weak external dimension to its citizenship. What are the democratic concerns about external citizenship? First of all, you might say this is wonderful. Why? Because dual citizenship is in a way an individual right to freedom of movement that applies and also includes third country nationals. If they have two passports, they can move freely between two states. So why should that be bad? Why shouldn't we promote this also as a way of providing more people with opportunities for mobility? Well, the concern is, why would you want to give people a passport with no genuine link to your country? Just because their grandparents happen to be immigrants from that country. Is that strong enough in order to give them an entitlement of unconditional immigration, not just to that country of origin, but to the whole of the EU, because that's the implication under EU law. So there are concerns about unconditional jus sanguinis in particular. Secondly, there is a question about legal duties. External citizens have rights. Should they also have duties, such as military service, which is something that some countries still have. It's mandatory military service. It's a major reason why people want to get rid of their citizenship rather than keep it. In other countries, and this is rather exceptional, also tax any income of their citizens earned abroad. And that includes the US and Israel. And it's very hard to renounce your US citizenship if you have tax debts with the federal tax authorities. Thirdly, there is a question about the impact of external citizenship on the integration of the people concerned in the country where they live. So some people think that these transnational ties actually diminish the potential and the opportunities for integration, and therefore people shouldn't be allowed to keep these ties. Well, the question is, does it make a difference? If you prohibit them from carrying the passport, does that change their loyalty and affiliation? Is that really a good integration strategy? And I think the answer will generally be no. There is a specific case that we've looked into. It's also present in one of the working papers that you can pick up from the table. What about external and dual citizenship in cases where a country has a kin minority just across the border that is not of immigration origin, but has emerged because the country has shrunk in size? And the classic case is Hungary, but there is also Romania and Moldova, where a similar situation applies not to a minority, but to the majority of the Moldovan population. And in these cases, we do see there is still a potential for international conflict. And it's not obvious that the best answer is give passports to all these minorities, because that might actually reduce their claims to be also recognized as autonomous linguistic minorities within the country where they reside. Finally, there is a specific question about the EU, as I've already mentioned. There might be a need for coordination among the rules for external citizenship, which is plainly outside the scope of the EU treaties, but the problem is politically there and on the agenda, because external citizenship can be a way of bypassing member state immigration control. And secondly, there is also a democratic concern that David Owen will probably talk about. What about EU citizens residing in other member states that can no longer vote, either in their country of origin, because that country doesn't grant external voting rights, or in their country of residence, because generally EU citizens cannot vote in their country of residence? So why would that be compatible with EU democracy if, as a result of having made use of your right of freedom of movement, you are deprived of your franchise at the most important level, which is clearly the national one? My view on this is that what this debate shows, the pro and con arguments, is that we have an alternative between two views that are equally indefensible. One is we can conceive of democratic states as either ethnic nations where everybody belongs just because of descent, or as societies of co-residents who are just the people who are present in the territory. Both of these conceptions are increasingly inadequate in a world of increasing mobility and migration, and we need to find another conception that I won't explain here for the sake of time. Let me briefly conclude by showing you a couple of preliminary results on external voting rights and where they exist in the EU. We have here a global distribution based on a data set produced by Michael Collier. and I've slightly updated this and picked out the EU countries and accession and EEA states. And what you see here is there are only 5 countries where EU citizens cannot vote from abroad, and 3 countries where they have to return to the country on election day in order to vote. All the other countries have some form of voting rights, and in a big majority of cases, this is not about special representation of expatriates, but just an assimilated vote that will be counted together with all the others. This is the map based on the same data where you see the distribution. The outliers are Ireland, Denmark, Montenegro, and Macedonia, where you cannot vote when you have permanent residence abroad, and Turkey and Greece, Cyprus, and I've forgotten Malta in the first group. Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus are those where you have to return to cast your vote. Again, for external voting, there are pro and contra arguments. I won't be able to go into this for the sake of time, but I think many of the arguments are spurious. For example, the idea that if you are a citizen, you must have the right to vote. This was an argument made by the Austrian Constitutional Court because it says so in the Constitution. Therefore, external citizens gain the voting rights. That ignores that, you know, all voting rights are always differentiated on the basis of residence, inevitably. So the question is there and needs to be answered in terms of the strength of ties that immigrants have. It cannot be just because they happen to have inherited a passport that it would be good enough as a democratic reason for involving them in collectively binding decisions. Then there are a couple of special claims that have to do with immigrants' economic contributions, compensation for coerced out migration. Bosnia and Afghanistan were classical cases, and Jeremy Grace is probably taking up this point. And what about temporary absentees who are not permanent residents abroad? Why shouldn't you have a duty to provide them with the opportunity to vote? Because they will be affected by virtually all of the laws that are going to be passed by the legislature when they return. I will, yes, these are more or less pro-arguments. There are also democratic concerns about external voting that have to do with the idea that external citizens are not subjected to most of the coercive legislation if they have permanent residence abroad. And again, you can make an argument that at least their citizenship status is still regulated, and in that case they are obviously affected just because of the fact that they are legally citizens. There is also a question, should they be able to vote in 2 countries? Because many of them will be dual citizens. Is that a violation of the principle one person, one vote? And my answer to that would be no, not necessarily, because their vote counts for one and one only in each single election. Their votes are never added up in these elections, which might raise a problem for the EU, where actually in the Council, indirectly, their votes are added up. So that might be in some way an argument for restricting dual voting between 2 member states. Finally, there are arguments about importing homeland conflicts and about the possibility that the external vote might tip or swamp the electoral outcome. And with regard to the possibility that it might tip, so that a tiny percentage of external voters might change the electoral outcome, I would think this is part of the democratic game. You can pick out any particular group and say, this is the group responsible for the outcome. It's partly how you define the group. So I will just conclude with the following remarks. The trend towards external voting is plainly irreversible, no matter how we think about it normatively. So we better learn how to cope with it and make the best of it. And we should address the prior question, who are the citizens who have voting rights because they carry the passports? And maybe what really ought to be addressed here is unlimited jus sanguinis, an easy reacquisition of citizenship just based on ancestry. And finally, and that is the connection to the next statement by David Owen, there are very specific reasons to think about coordinating external voting in the EU, not just for the EP elections, but also for national elections. Thank you.